Good morning, everyone. It's Sunday, February 24th. It's time to go on the record. A Massachusetts power surge on Capitol Hill. Congressman Jim McGovern, now chairman of the House Rules Committee, the new dynamics between the Capitol and the White House.
Our campaign is about transforming our country.
Bernie Sanders is back in the presidential race. Can he still stand out in a growing Democratic field? And the politics of championships. How will the Patriots and the Red Sox handle a looming D.C. dilemma? Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to OTR on this last Sunday of February. Can you believe the month is flying by? I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Jenny Booth. Thank you for joining us. And we're joined this morning by Congressman Jim McGovern. He's a Democrat. He represents the state's 2nd Congressional District. He was first elected to Congress back in '96. Representative McGovern is the chairman of the House Rules Committee, as we mentioned, was born in Worcester, is a graduate of American University. It's always great to see you, sir. Thanks for your time.
Happy to be with you.
Great.
You just had a week off, school vacation week. Are you ready to go back and deal with...
we really don't have a week off. This is a week where I do work in the district.
Work.
Constituent work.
Exactly.
But I'm ready to go back. There's lots of things we need to do, and there are important issues before us.
In fact, one of the things that a lot of people are expecting that's going to be coming up pretty soon is the Mueller report. It could be sent out as of the taping right now. It has not yet been released. But when it goes to the Attorney General, how confident are you that all of it is going to be made public?
Well, that's a good question. I have no idea. I mean, I hope that as much as possible it can be made public. I mean, people have a right to know what happened. Our democracy was attacked by a foreign power. Clearly, there are ties between this administration and the Trump campaign and Russia. People need to know the truth.
How confident are you that Barr will make most of it public, the parts that need to be made public based on just what he said during his confirmation hearings?
Yeah, it didn't give me a lot of confidence. I mean, Congress may have to subpoena the document. I mean, we're going to have to demand that it be released if it isn't. People have a right to know.
Do you think there are some names of folks who cooperated but are not being charged that should be protected?
Well, look, I don't know the details of the investigation. Mueller has kept everything kind of, close to the vest, and that's the way it should be. Look, the important thing is we need to know the truth, and we need to know the extent of the involvement or the collusion between the Trump people and Russia.
And voters have a right to know that.
Voters have a right to know, absolutely.
Or maybe no disconnect. You're not prejudging the Mueller report at all. Whatever it says, you want to read
Mueller
it.
has behaved as a total professional. He's not been leaking. He's not been giving press conferences.
Right.
I mean, he's doing this the way we want it to be done, professionally. And so when it's done, everybody should know what's in it.
Next thing I want to talk about is the president. And right after Mr. Trump declared he was using emergency funding for his wall, you held nothing back. This is what you tweeted. And you circled the section of the Constitution and you wrote, "Good morning at Real Donald Trump. Here is the part of the Constitution that says you can't build your stupid wall. We'll see you in court." Held nothing back there, sir. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, because I think what I tweeted is the truth. Next week, Congress will probably vote on a resolution of disapproval, which I expect will pass the House, and it will be forced to be dealt with in the Senate. And I hope it's a resolution of disapproval that will be supported not just by Democrats, but by Republicans too. Look, I mean, the Congress is a separate and independent branch of government. We're not a rubber stamp for this president. We're not supposed to be apologists for this president or any other president. We need to do our job, and we need to protect our constitutional powers. And so that's what's at stake.
As House Rules Chair, you are sort of the gatekeeper of all legislation that will go to the floor of the House. So my question to you is, what's the best way to launch action against President Trump in the next months if the Mueller report produces what many people are claiming it will show, which is collusion?
Well, first of all, we have a number of committees that are charged with doing oversight of the Russian investigation, of corruption in this administration, of conflicts of interest. We need to have them do their work and be able to make recommendations. What the Rules Committee will do is take those recommendations and bring them to the floor. Look, if there's wrongdoing, if there's illegality, if there are things that need to be addressed, I guarantee you that the Rules Committee will not be hesitant to bring those things to the floor before the full House.
Regardless of what the Mueller report says?
Well, look, I mean, the Mueller report's going to be very, very important. But the thing, the concerns we have about this administration are not just collusion with Russia. I mean, it's corruption on a massive scale. And so we need to, whatever needs to be done, we're going to do it.
In just a couple of months that the Democrats have been in control of the House, have you noticed any shift in the way Washington has been run?
Yeah.
You know, the first 2 years the president had every branch. Now the House is in a different.
Well,
direction.
one of the things that is a little bit different, and I, as chairman of the Rules Committee, we have tried to change the way we do business, is I think the House of Representatives is a more accommodating place. I mean, we're bringing ideas to the floor that in the previous Congresses were blocked, but we're also bringing ideas to the floor that I disagree with, some Republican ideas. Congress is supposed to be a deliberative body, and we ought to be able to debate these big issues. People ought to offer amendments, and we ought to then, have votes, and that's how legislation should proceed.
So let's talk about election cycles, because there are at least 2 presidential candidates in line with your political philosophy. Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, correct? Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont. So who is likely to get your support? And I'm going to bring the issue of age up, but not just for Bernie Sanders, not just for Elizabeth Warren, but even for Donald Trump. Does age matter? Since
I'm with Elizabeth in this presidential race, and I think she'd be a great president. She represents my values, and I hope that she prevails. But I think Democrats need to be disciplined this time around, and no matter who is the nominee, whether if it's Elizabeth, I hope everybody who's supporting other candidates will get behind her very strongly. And if Elizabeth doesn't prevail, I will support whoever the nominee is. Failure is not an option. Donald Trump has been a disaster. He's been an embarrassment. He has diminished our country and diminished the presidency. This has to end.
But the whole question about how the future, both parties, Republicans and Democrats, really rely on the millennials and those who are just sort of beginning to get involved in politics. Yeah. Do you think they can be attracted in large numbers, not just in small segments, to someone who is approaching 80 or is 80?
So I think it's the wrong question. I think millennials, they give me great hope. They're the future. And I think they judge candidates based on their ideas, not on their looks, not on their age. I mean, it's on ideas. I mean, Bernie Sanders, to his great credit, excited millennials in the last presidential election, even though he was older than Hillary Clinton. Bottom line is, I mean, people, as they should be, are motivated by ideas and about how to make this country stronger and better.
You've been pressing for renewed action on gun control and Medicare this past week. How aggressively do you think that Democrats will push for these issues when the Mueller investigation is expected to sort of suck all the oxygen off of Capitol Hill in the next few months?
Well, we go back to into session on Monday. The Rules Committee is going to meet. We're going to bring to the floor a bill expanding universal background checks. We're also going to bring a bill to the floor to eliminate this Charleston loophole, which says if the background check isn't done by a certain amount of time, you can go out and buy a gun anyway. I mean, that's what the shooter in Charleston who killed all those people in that church used to be able to get his gun. So we're going to move on these things. I mean, we have an agenda, and yeah, we're going to hold the president accountable, but we're not obsessed with the president to the point that we're not going to do these other things.
So it's not going to get lost in
No. We need to lower prescription drugs. We need to make sure people can get paid a decent wage for the work that they do. We need to deal with the issues of like the climate crisis. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff we have.
But there are obstacles in the way of all these things you want to move on. I mean, you may move in your chamber wonderfully, but then the Senate, the president are in there.
Well, and to the extent that we can't get things through the Senate, and to the extent that the president frustrates some of these good ideas, then you know what? People are going to have to understand that we're going to have to do better in the next election. We're going to have to elect a Democratic senator, and we're going to have to a Democratic Senate, and elect a Democratic president.
And we're going to go to the OTR pop quiz right now.
My favorite part.
See, you were looking. You were wondering
no
where I
cynicism
had
in that.
Yeah. None whatsoever. All right, here we go. It's time for the quiz. Some second district trivia. Okay.
Okay.
Here's question 1. Gone, but certainly not forgotten, Spags was a legendary discount store along Route 9 in Shrewsbury.
That's correct.
Besides no bags, what was their unique tradition? And we have some options on the screen here. Was it a pumpkin giveaway? Was it a Christmas wreath giveaway? Was it a tomato plant giveaway?
Tomato plants.
Amen.
I bet you
we used to get them.
I was just going to say, I bet you
I got one of those. Everybody at home, yeah, we did that too. Right, I know, right. All right, question 2. Robert Goddard, the Worcester-born aerospace engineer, fired off the first liquid fuel rocket in what second district town? It happened either in Auburn, Holden, or Leicester.
Auburn.
You are hot. In 1926, it was his aunt's farm. Today, it's the Packagug Golf Course, by the way. Did you know that?
I did know that,
You see?
Yeah.
He's not.
He knows his district.
Right, yeah.
He knows his district.
Take a break. We'll be right back.